Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. It started on one of those quiet evenings when the world outside seemed to move slower than usual. The rain had been falling since afternoon, soft and steady, tapping gently against the living room window. I remember sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, trying to lose myself in an old movie just to escape the emptiness that had settled inside me after months of emotional distance from everyone around me. The house felt too large, too quiet, and the silence was starting to feel heavy until he walked in. My stepson, Ethan, had just come home from college for a short break. He was 22 now, mature, thoughtful, and far from the awkward teenager I once knew. When he entered the room, his presence somehow changed the air around me. There was a calmness about him, a quiet understanding that I couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way he smiled gently when he saw me, or how he noticed things no one else did anymore, like how tired I looked, or how long I'd been holding back a sigh. He sat beside me on the couch, careful not to invade my space, and for a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft patter of rain and the low hum of the movie. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Are you okay?" His voice was low and sincere, the kind of tone that makes you drop your guard before you even realize it. I nodded, but he didn't believe me. He reached over, hesitant at first, and placed his hand gently over mine. It wasn't meant to mean anything more than comfort, but something about that small gesture made my breath catch. Maybe it was the warmth of his touch, or maybe it was because it had been so long since anyone had reached out to me like that, with kindness, without judgment. For a moment, I felt seen again. We both stayed like that, wordless, caught in an unexpected silence that seemed to say everything we were both afraid to. And then it happened, just a flicker of something unexplainable in the air between us. Something that shouldn't have been there. I pulled my hand away quickly, pretending it was nothing, but my heart wouldn't stop racing. I didn't understand it, and I didn't want to. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain, my mind kept replaying that moment. The way his eyes lingered on mine, the warmth that still seemed to cling to my skin. I told myself it was just the loneliness, that I was imagining things, but deep down I knew something had shifted. Something neither of us could take back. The next morning, the house was filled with the faint smell of coffee and the soft sound of rain still dripping from the trees outside. I came downstairs half awake, trying to shake off the thoughts that had kept me restless through the night. Ethan was already in the kitchen, standing by the counter with 2 mugs in his hands. When he turned around and smiled, it was the same gentle, effortless smile that always managed to calm me. "Morning," he said, handing me one of the mugs. "You looked like you needed this." I thanked him quietly, avoiding his eyes for a moment. I didn't want him to see the confusion still written on my face. But he noticed anyway, he always did. He had this way of paying attention, of reading between words, that both comforted and unsettled me. We sat at the table, talking about ordinary things, his classes, the long drive home, the weather. But underneath every word was an unspoken question neither of us dared to ask. The space between us felt heavier than usual, charged with something invisible but impossible to ignore. He laughed softly at one of his own stories, and for a second I caught myself smiling too. It felt good, too good. I missed that kind of ease, that kind of connection. I had spent years building walls around my heart, walls made of silence and unspoken disappointments. But with him, it was like those walls were slowly starting to crumble without my permission. As the day went on, he helped me with small things around the house, fixing a loose shelf, carrying boxes from the attic, cleaning the porch. He moved with a quiet confidence, patient and thoughtful, never once making me feel like I was in the way. Every small act of kindness from him felt like sunlight in a cold room. In the evening, we ended up in the living room again. The rain had finally stopped, and the golden light from the setting sun filtered through the curtains. The movie from the night before still sat paused on the screen. I reached for the remote, but he stopped me gently. "You were different last night," he said quietly. "You seemed sad." I hesitated. "It's nothing. Just been thinking a lot lately." "About what?" he asked, leaning slightly forward, his tone soft but curious. "About how fast time moves," I said, trying to sound casual. about how we lose pieces of ourselves without realizing it. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at me for a long moment, as if searching for something deeper behind my words. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the ceiling fan. I could feel the weight of his gaze, and it made my chest tighten in ways I didn't understand. Then he said something I wasn't prepared for. "You're not invisible, you know. People see you." "I see you." My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to respond, to brush it off, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was look away, hoping he couldn't hear how fast my heart was beating. Later that night, I stood by the window, watching the faint glow of the streetlights outside. The world was quiet again, but inside me everything felt loud. His words replayed in my mind like a song I couldn't stop hearing. I told myself it was just a moment, that it didn't mean anything, but something inside me whispered otherwise. The following days felt strangely different, like the rhythm of the house had changed without me realizing it. Ethan and I fell into an easy routine: morning coffee, small chores, late dinners. From the outside, it probably looked ordinary, but inside that quiet routine, something unspoken was growing. Every shared glance, every unfinished conversation, carried a kind of tension I couldn't name. One afternoon, I found him sitting on the porch steps, staring at the rain clouds gathering again. I joined him without saying a word. He smiled, then offered me a blanket, just like the first night. For a moment, it almost felt like the world had stopped moving. I could hear his breathing, calm and steady, and I realized how much peace I felt in that silence, a peace that scared me because I knew what it could mean. He started talking about his life away from home. His voice softened when he spoke about the loneliness of being on his own, how sometimes he wished he had someone who understood him. I listened, nodding quietly, feeling a strange connection in his words. Maybe that's what it was, two lonely souls finding comfort where they weren't supposed to. That evening, he helped me cook dinner. The kitchen was small, and every time we brushed past each other, I could feel the warmth of his presence linger. It wasn't intentional, but it was there, subtle, heavy, impossible to ignore. At one point, he caught me staring, and instead of looking away, he held my gaze. It was only for a second, but it felt like time stretched in that moment. Later that night, as I sat on the couch folding laundry, I heard him on a video call in his room. His laughter filled the hallway. It was light, easy, different from how he sounded with me. I couldn't help but listen. The way he spoke hinted at someone else in his life, maybe a girl from school, someone closer to his world. The thought hit me harder than I expected. I felt foolish for even caring, but the truth was I did. That's when I started to question myself. Was I simply lonely and clinging to the only warmth I'd found in a long time? Or was there something real forming between us, something neither of us was ready to admit? The next day, I tried to put distance between us. I kept myself busy, spent hours cleaning, took long walks, and avoided those quiet moments where our eyes might meet again. But Ethan noticed. That evening, he stopped me in the hallway and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" His voice carried both concern and confusion. I shook my head quickly. "No, not at all. I just need to clear my mind." He nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Sometimes people pull away when they're scared of what they're feeling," he said softly before walking away. His words stayed with me long after he'd gone to bed. I stood there in the dim hallway, realizing he understood more than I'd given him credit for. Maybe he felt the same uncertainty, the same pull that I couldn't explain. That night, sleep didn't come easily. My thoughts circled around him, his kindness, his patience, the way his presence made the house feel alive again. I didn't know where the line was anymore or if I'd already crossed it. The air in the house grew heavier with every passing day, as if the walls themselves could sense the tension neither of us dared to speak about. Ethan tried to act normal, offering to help with dinner, making me laugh during breakfast, but beneath the surface, everything felt different. Every small gesture carried a weight, every glance seemed to last a little too long. One evening, a storm rolled in. The sky turned dark early, thunder rumbling in the distance. Power flickered twice before finally going out, leaving the house wrapped in shadows. I lit a few candles and sat by the window, watching the lightning flash across the yard. It was strange how the silence between thunderclaps seemed to echo the silence between us. Ethan came into the room, holding a flashlight. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, steady. I nodded, but my heart was already racing. He sat across from me, the soft candlelight flickering between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The storm outside was wild, but the one inside me was worse. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said quietly, "You've been distant lately." "I can feel it." His words caught me off guard. I wanted to deny it, to change the subject, but the truth was sitting right there in the air between us. "I just think we both need some space," I finally said. My voice didn't sound convincing, not even to me. "Space from what?" he asked. "From something we haven't even said out loud?" That question hung there like thunder that never came. I couldn't answer. I didn't even know how. My thoughts tangled between what was right and what felt real. I wanted to run, but I also wanted to stay. He stood up slowly, pacing the room, his frustration barely hidden. "I don't understand why pretending makes it easier," he said. "You act like what's happening doesn't exist, but I see it. I feel it." The candlelight flickered, throwing shadows across his face. The way he looked at me, hurt, uncertain, made something inside me twist painfully. The storm outside roared louder, shaking the windows. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my voice trembled when I finally spoke. "Ethan, we can't." He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "Then tell me to stop," he said softly. "Tell me this means nothing." I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. My mind screamed one thing, but my heart refused to listen. The thunder crashed again, the lights flickered back on, and in that brief flash of brightness, our eyes locked, filled with questions, fear, and something neither of us could undo. And then, just like that, the light went out again, leaving us standing in the dark, caught between what we wanted and what we knew we shouldn't. The power came back late that night, long after the storm had passed. The house was quiet again, but something in the silence had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt charged, like the air right before lightning strikes. Ethan had gone to his room without another word, and I stayed in the living room, staring at the flickering light from the TV that I'd turned on just to fill the emptiness. My thoughts refused to settle. His words, "Tell me this means nothing," kept echoing in my head like a challenge I didn't know how to answer. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. There was a note on the kitchen counter, short and simple: "Went for a drive. Need to clear my head." I stood there for a long time, reading it over and over, feeling the weight of everything unsaid. Something told me he wasn't just trying to clear his head. He was trying to distance himself from me, from whatever had almost happened between us. Hours passed. I tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. By evening, worry started to replace confusion. The roads outside were still slick from the storm, and the idea of him driving alone made me uneasy. When the phone finally rang, it wasn't him, it was his friend from college. "Hey, I just got a weird message from Ethan," the voice said. He sounded off. Did something happen? That question hit me like a wave. Something had happened, but not something I could explain. I didn't know how to describe the tension, the confusion, the silence that followed. All I knew was that he was out there, upset, maybe angry, maybe hurt, and it was because of me. As night fell again, headlights flashed through the window. I ran to the door and saw his car pulling into the driveway. Relief hit me first, but it was short-lived when I saw his expression. He looked distant, his jaw tense, his eyes tired. "Ethan," I started, but he cut me off. "I needed to think," he said, his voice low but steady. "About us. About what this is." I didn't know what to say. Every answer felt wrong. He stepped closer, but this time, there was no softness in his voice. "You keep saying we shouldn't feel this way, but what if we already do? Pretending won't make it go away." Before I could respond, the front door opened, and there he was. My husband. He had come home early from his work trip, bag still in hand, surprise written across his face. For a few endless seconds, no one spoke. Ethan froze. I could feel my heart stop. The silence was deafening. "Did I interrupt something?" he asked slowly, his eyes shifting between us. I tried to speak, to explain, but my voice failed me. Ethan stepped back, guilt flickering across his face, but the damage was already done. My husband didn't wait for an answer. He just turned, set his bags down, and walked toward the kitchen in silence. The air was thick, every breath heavy with what had almost been exposed. When Ethan finally whispered, "I'll leave tomorrow," it broke something inside me. I wanted to stop him, to explain, but I couldn't even explain it to myself. That night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe around me, each creak, each sound, carrying the weight of everything that had unraveled. The next morning, the house felt heavier than ever. Ethan's things were packed neatly by the door. The sight of them made my stomach tighten. I'd barely slept, and when I finally gathered the courage to go downstairs, my husband was already in the kitchen. He didn't look up when I entered. The silence between us said everything words couldn't. Ethan appeared a few minutes later, looking tired but calm, as if he'd already accepted whatever was coming. "I'll leave after breakfast," he said quietly. My husband didn't respond, just gave a short nod. The air was thick with all the things none of us were brave enough to say. I poured myself some coffee, my hands trembling slightly. Every moment felt fragile, like one wrong word could shatter whatever was left of the peace in that room. Then my husband spoke, his tone even but sharp. "You two seem close lately," he said, not looking at either of us. It wasn't a question, but it didn't need to be. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely think. "We've just been talking," I managed to say, but my voice sounded thin, unsure. Ethan looked down, his jaw tight. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then, unexpectedly, my husband let out a small, tired laugh. "You don't have to explain," he said. "I know when something's changed." He stood up, leaning against the counter. "You've both been walking around this house like ghosts. Maybe this isn't about guilt, it's about what you've both been missing." His words stunned me. He wasn't angry, not in the way I'd feared. There was something deeper in his tone, sadness, maybe even understanding. He looked at Ethan, then at me, and said, "Sometimes we don't realize the damage silence can do, until someone else fills it." Ethan's eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew this was goodbye, not just from him, but from the part of me that had been lost for too long. "Take care of yourself," he said softly before walking out the door. The sound of the car engine starting felt like the closing of a chapter one wasn't ready to end. I turned to my husband, expecting anger, but instead he looked almost relieved. "Maybe now we can start being honest," he said quietly, and walked out of the room. For the first time, I was truly alone. The rain had started again outside, light and steady, almost cleansing. I stood there, trying to make sense of everything, the choices, the timing, the fragile moments that led to this. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "You'll understand soon. I left something for you." Confused, I went to the porch. On the small table by the door was a sealed envelope. Inside was a photograph of the three of us, taken years ago, before everything had changed, and a note in his handwriting. "Sometimes love isn't meant to be kept. It's meant to remind us we're still capable of feeling." And just like that, the tension broke, not with answers, but with acceptance. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet, in a way that made me realize just how much noise emotions can create when left unspoken. Ethan had left, my husband had returned to his usual routine, and the house seemed to have settled back into its old rhythm. But something inside me had changed. It wasn't love, not in the way people imagine it, it was awareness. Awareness of how fragile the heart can be, how easily loneliness can disguise itself as something deeper. A week later, I found myself sitting on the same porch where everything had started. The rain had stopped, the air smelled fresh, and the world outside seemed almost new. I took out the photograph Ethan had left behind. The three of us looked happy, untouched by time, untouched by confusion. It reminded me that once, there had been peace in our lives, and maybe, just maybe, it could exist again. That night, my husband joined me on the porch. For a while, we didn't speak. Then, quietly, he said, "You know, sometimes we forget that people grow lonely even in the same house." His tone wasn't accusing, it was almost gentle. "I don't want us to live like strangers anymore." It was the first time in a long while I'd heard hope in his voice. I nodded slowly, unsure if I was ready to forgive myself yet, but knowing that I wanted to try. Because the truth was, what happened with Ethan wasn't just about forbidden emotions. It was about realizing how empty I'd become, how much I'd stopped reaching for connection. In the weeks that followed, my husband and I began to rebuild slowly, cautiously, but honestly. There were still moments when the memory of Ethan's kindness came back to me, but instead of guilt, it brought understanding. Sometimes, people enter our lives not to stay, but to remind us of what we've forgotten. Months later, a letter arrived. It was from Ethan, postmarked from another state. He wrote that he'd started over, new job, new city, new peace. His words were calm, content. He ended the letter with a line that stayed with me long after I folded it away. Maybe love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go with grace. I smiled through tears, finally understanding what he meant. We can't always choose who stirs our hearts, but we can choose what we learn from it. Looking back now, that chapter of my life wasn't about loss, it was about rediscovery. About finding the courage to feel again, to face loneliness, and to heal where silence once lived. So I'll ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have walked away sooner, or stayed to see where the truth led? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to see what happens next in a sequel, maybe it's a story still waiting to be told. Summary: a woman trapped in quiet loneliness finds unexpected emotional comfort in her grown stepson during a storm-filled week. As tension rises, unspoken emotions blur boundaries, leading to a confrontation that changes their lives forever. Through heartbreak, forgiveness, and reflection, she learns that love isn't always about staying, it's about understanding when to let go.